Okay. Cooperative Legacy Project interview number 78, June 6th, 2007. We're visiting with, and I want to get this right. You were on the board at Lake Region Rural Electric Cooperative. Board member Joe Mathews. Joe, where and when were you born?
July 3rd, 1925, in Lilly.
In Lilly.
Yeah, house still stands.
Okay. Do you still have Lilly as your address here? Or?
No, Lilly died.
Lilly died, okay.
It's Webster now.
All right. When did your family originally settle in this area?
My grandpa homesteaded here in 1883. He's an old-timer.
And where were they originally from?
He was a Canadian Englishman, and my grandma was a Bohemian, and they met in Watertown.
Oh, that's an interesting mix.
Yeah.
Okay. What was your father's name?
Lloyd. And that's my first name, but I never went by it. I was the only boy, and so until I was old enough to vote, I was Sonny. I guess my dad called me that till he died.
Yeah. You want to talk about him a little bit? What sort of a guy was he?
Well, he was pretty quiet and unassuming. My mother was more outgoing. From what I was only 6 when she died, so I don't remember a lot about her.
What was her name?
Emma. She was the same age as my dad. She was born in 1888. They both were. And my dad lived till he was 80, so I got him beat a little bit. And my mother died when she was, I think it was 44. She wasn't very old. And she left 5 little kids, so my dad had his hands full right from day one.
Yeah, did he have any help with you all?
No, I was the youngest at 6, and my oldest sister was about 15. I had 4 older sisters. So he had the help of them, and she had cancer for several years, and she prepared the oldest girls for the inevitable that she knew was coming, and when it did, they were pretty well able to do a lot of things, and did, and I'm sure made it a lot easier for Dad, and that was in the early 30s, and I don't need to tell you how things were then. They were tough.
Yeah.
We left with 5 little kids. We can't imagine what it must have been.
What are your siblings' names?
Doris was the oldest one. She's been gone, I suppose it's 10 years now, and Fern has just been gone 2 years. And the third one, Merle, still lives in Minneapolis. She's older than I am. She's 87. And then my youngest sister, Pearl, was just a couple years older than me, and she's been gone a long time, too.
Okay. What are, I suppose that's probably the early memory you have. Do you remember your mother at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember well the day she died, on Christmas Day in 1932.
It was a difficult time
oh, it had
for
to be.
all the way around.
Yeah, I was too young to, didn't mean as much, but I had a grandmother and grandfather that lived in Lilly, and I remember coming out of church that morning, and she was there at home when we left for church, and came out of church, and we saw the hearse coming out of our place. So, and the older girls, of course, were more ready for it than I was, but I remember it well. And we didn't go home. We went over to my grandfather's, which was right close to the church. But it was a sad, sad time.
Sure. You have a lot of memories of the 1930s?
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Did you have dust storms around here the way
oh,
they did in some areas?
Yeah, we did. I can remember, we lived right on the edge of Lilly, and I can remember one of the worst days, probably the one that's still recorded in Watertown, of a dust storm in mid-May, I believe it was. And my dad was doing some field cultivating with horses a half a mile from home, and I remember walking down there with a drink of water for him, and it was just scary. It was the sky was black, and you just it was really a scary time. But and one of my sisters was a house cleaning fanatic, and she was at it constantly because there was dust came in every place, and dust on the windowsills and dust on everything. And
it was very fine dust.
Oh yeah.
Economics were not very good either with all that going on, low prices and.
Yeah, I'm sure my dad had a tough time of it with 5 kids and no income to speak of. We milked a few cows, and that's what we survived on. I'm sure it was. And we lived on the edge of town, and we did sell milk. And as kids, we delivered milk to various places for 6 cents a quart, I think it was, delivered. And I remember doing that as I got older. Why, it kept on for quite a few years, you know.
Did they do chickens on the farm?
Yeah, we had chickens too. Yeah.
Sell eggs?
Not a lot, but well, there wasn't. It never was a big flock of chickens, but we had some. So
yeah. Okay. So when you were a kid, did you want to farm?
I guess I did. I never, nothing else ever really entered my mind. As my dad was, well, he had a younger brother, and his name was Joe. That's who I was named for. In fact, he was the younger. There was 4 in his family: my dad and 2 girls, and then the youngest brother, Joe, who died in freshman initiation down at State College.
Really?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, there's various stories about that. I remember reading about it years ago, accounts from the chief of police and the dean of men and the president of the college, and they all had a little different version of what happened. But it boiled down to it was a freshman initiation thing that happened. And he fell off or pushed off or something of the railroad car west of Brookings, a mile or a mile and a half, and found him along the railroad track. And he had been kind of a loner here. He'd gone to high school in Lilly. He was the only boy in his class. And of course they're isolated. Everybody was isolated. And he was kind of a loner, like I said. And when he got down there, why, some of those initiations got pretty rough, we understand.
Was this a fraternity type thing?
I don't know if it was or it was just a regular initiation thing.
Did they do that to just the freshmen in general?
Yeah, I think so. That's my understanding.
Okay.
And
Was there an investigation?
Well, there was, but it didn't amount to much because everybody had a different version, and of course, my grandpa especially was really not outgoing at all. And when this happened, he and my dad, to get there, they didn't have a car. And they got a telegram about it. And there was one car in Lilly, and that fellow, they hired him to take him to Watertown. They stayed overnight in a hotel and then took the train to Brookings the next day, which is unbelievable. And by then, if there was any covering up, I don't know, but it was sure well accomplished. They had a couple days, really, you know. So we never did get the right story, I'm sure, but the doctor that was in Bradley was a family doctor, and he'd been there for quite a while, and he wanted him to do something about it then, but my grandpa was not one to push things, and just nothing ever happened. I'm sure some heads would have rolled if that happened today, and should have probably should have at that time. I don't know, but we got the versions from 3 or 4 people: the president, the dean of men, the chief of police, and I think the mayor of the town. I forget, and I remember reading the letters, but
they were all different.
Yeah, they were all different versions. Yeah. So it's he would have probably been a farmer, but he was, well, college age, 16, 17 when he died. Yeah.
It was kind of like the agricultural college.
Yeah, that's what he was enrolled in. Yeah. Yeah.
Same as up in North.
Yeah.
obviously, I've got another question here. Obviously, life out here on the farm or wherever your farm was at that point was quite a bit different than things are today.
Yeah, totally different. You know, it's just we lived right on the edge of Lily, where I was born, and it was a rented quarter. My dad didn't own it. He did own some land out here in the mid-teens, I guess. He bought some land when at first that was a boom. Then we thought it was $100 an acre. He couldn't make the payments, but he paid nothing but interest for about 12 or 14 years before he gave up. And then bought it back some years later in the early 30s for like $10 an acre. That's what started, got a little higher, 15, 20, but it was really, had to be tough. And to have 4 kids had to be 5 kids rather, 4 sisters, and so he had a tough time. But we always got along, and like I say, my mother had been sick so long that she trained the older girls well, and what they were gonna have to do when she was gone, and they did.
Were there quite a few farm foreclosures? During those years?
People moving all spring and fall. There was moving time.
Yeah, what did it look like when people were moving? Did they pile everything on the
hay rack?
Car, like, on the hay rack?
Because there wasn't many cars.
Yeah, not exactly like the Grapes of Wrath or something. But,
but it was tough.
With hay racks.
Or wagons, you know.
I just interviewed a guy last week whose family had to move from, where was it, Wesleyan Springs to Highmore that way.
Is that right? Gosh. Yeah. Here it was pretty much local. Oh, there was people moved farther, but there was a lot of rented farms, and they just changed renters every year or two, a lot of them. So we were fortunate, and we never did move, other than Lily, and my grandmother died, or my grandpa died in 36, and my grandma was here alone, of course, and then we moved out here. And
this was your grandpa's farm?
Yeah, my grandpa homesteaded here.
Okay.
That's where he was. His first claim was across the road, and they moved across after a year or two and bought this quarter because they couldn't get water on that quarter. And that happens to be the center where the first pivot is that we put in, where they couldn't get water. There was a depression out in the center of it, and that's where their sod house was. And that's where my dad.
They have plenty of water on.
Yes, there is. Hard to believe now. But this was dry all in my early years, and it was pasture. It was great because it was low ground, you know, and it was a lifesaver for their few cows. Yeah.
Now there's walleyes out there?
Well, yeah, there is. There's a lot of fish out there. Yeah.
Okay. Did you go to country school?
No, I never did. We were in
right into town.
Lily, yeah. It was the first independent consolidated school district in the state.
Really?
Yeah. Lily Independent, 136.
Okay.
And the format was four townships, or 4 schools in a township. And here, 3 of them consolidated and came to Lily. So they had, that's where I went to school all my life.
Do you remember when they consolidated? Was that
before my time? School? Yeah. It had been from way early back, I think. Yeah, there never was a school out. Well, we would have been in that first corner of this, but it was always the consolidated school, and there was always a building there. There was four big rooms with 12 grades, and the first high school. My mother was the first teacher, the first superintendent of the school there, and before she was married. She was born and raised west of Lily a little ways.
Okay. And she was a teacher then?
Taking
teacher training?
Yeah, she went to Northern Normal and Industrial School, NNIS.
Okay.
Yeah,
and that's what now is Northern University.
Yeah, right.
Okay. What do you think about the education system back then? Was it pretty good?
Well, I think it was not bad. It maybe left something to be desired, but it's all we knew, and we were satisfied with it.
Mhm.
It was better than the country
It
school.
met
We
the
were.
needs that you had out here at
Yeah,
that particular
yeah.
time.
There was 3 grades in a room. And,
How many kids in a class?
oh, when I graduated, there was 8. That was one of the smaller ones. My wife, we just saw a picture yesterday where we found there was 13.
Mhm.
It was probably an average of 10. And I imagine the 12 grades had about 100 or a little over enrollment at the high time.
Where do the kids go to school now? They go into Webster?
Yeah.
From
Yeah,
here
we
too?
all, yeah,
Down here
yeah,
at Bradley as well?
yeah, Webster,
Okay.
yeah,
So you would have graduated when?
43,
43.
yeah,
Of course, the war is going on.
yeah, was.
Did you get in the military? All?
Yeah, I did. I went in December of 45. Yeah,
Okay.
I was helping my dad farming, and it was pretty common practice for farm boys like that to get a farm deferment if they wanted to. They didn't have to do much of anything, just be there and be on the farm, and
Yeah.
you were excused for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I got tired of it after a while, wasn't accomplishing much, and I volunteered for the draft. That's what it amounted to. So that,
Was the war over at the time you volunteered?
no, it wasn't,
Was
but
still
it was
going?
good and towards the end of it.
Yeah.
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 Went about a year after that.
Oh, okay.
And I went overseas to the Western Pacific, Philippine Islands, where I spent my time. And in fact, the war was over on the way over there.
Okay.
And you can imagine the rumors that floated around. Then we're going to turn around, but we never turned around. We kept going.
Okay. Well, what was the Philippines? What was your unit?
86th Division. Yeah, but I went as a replacement. That's what everybody did.
Okay, yeah.
To the replacement depots there, and you were filtered out from there to various
So
outfits.
you were kind of taking the place of the guys that had been over there since they had fought their way over there.
Yeah.
Okay, where were you at in the Philippines?
The Manila area. Yeah.
Quite a bit different than South Dakota.
Oh, it was. Yeah.
There was still a lot of war damage around there.
Oh,
I
yeah.
expect?
Yeah. In fact, when we got there, it was right about the time the war was declared over. Yeah. And the Bataan thing was fresh in everybody's mind, and the American POWs, or that had been POWs, were still just getting off of the island at Corregidor. And that was a big thing to see that and see them. And I can remember well, they didn't have any bad feelings toward the Japanese at all. They were just so tickled to get out. They'd been in confinement for 3-4 years. A lot of them, a long time. These year tours you hear about in Iraq now, they sound kind of mild because nobody came home for a break during the time, and yeah.
So you were over there for how long?
A little over a year. Yeah. We were there for Philippine Independence Day on July 4th of 46, I suppose it would have been. Yeah. And the big thing was MacArthur was there, and big to-do over that, of course. Big parade, and we took part in that.
There were a lot of Filipinos that had fought in the war.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So when did you get home then?
Late 46.
It was kind of a long trip home?
Well, 30 days, I think. Yeah, something like that. No, it wasn't that long. It was more than that going over there, because we stopped a couple times. We went on a Liberty ship, and they were pretty slow.
Yeah.
Coming back, it was on a bigger boat and more people, but it was faster too. I've forgotten just how long, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was 3 weeks, I suppose.
You were from here in South Dakota, and you had never been to sea before. I guess before that, you get seasick?
No, I didn't, but it came close. I tell you, I remember the night we left San Francisco. There was a lot of people had shore leave, and young GIs, all of them, And of course, a lot of them had a lot of liquor, and right away they got sick as soon as the boat left the dock. When they were sick.
All hanging over the.
And just everybody on the boat was sick, and they had a hard time getting anything to eat. The cooks were sick. And I can remember that so vividly, just getting out of San Francisco that night. Boy, I thought the world was coming to an end, you know. And right away it was blackout. Everything was black right away. And, it was a mess if you ever saw one. They had these bunk beds, or not bunks, they were railings on top of one another, and there was, 8, 9 high. And I had a high one, which was fortunate because you can imagine the mess it was down the bottom.
Oh, yeah, but you had to get down through that, didn't you?
Yeah. People getting sick, you know, and stick their head out over the edge, and there'd come a load of vomit on somebody. You know? Well, I'll never forget that.
Already, you'd be sick,
that's the thing.
Contagious.
Try to get outside. You could go out on the deck. It was dark. Had blackout curtains at all the windows. But gosh, and then in the latrine, that was something else. People passed out in there, you know, and the stuff was just awash. I'll never forget that. God. And the latrines were. I don't know how to describe it even. There was a trough down there that excrement went out, and that would get plugged up, and, you know, and then it would build up in there. So you couldn't go in there. You get sick just walking by there. That was something. Then it went a couple of days before we got any food, because everybody was sick. There was a crew of Merchant Marine that ran it, and they took care of themselves and fed themselves, but they weren't feeding the troops. You know?
They kind of keep themselves in
they did.
Spot,
they did.
Avoid all these sick people. Had this ship taken people over before?
Oh yeah.
So they were, They had seen all these sick guys before.
I'm sure it was the same every trip. You know. No, that was something. Never forget.
While you were over there, did you get a chance to talk with any of the guys that had been involved in the fighting over there before they came home?
Yeah, there was a lot of the people that had been POWs on Luzon, or on Corregidor. They were all right there in the same camp we were. Yeah. And they didn't hold resentment towards the Japanese at all. They'd been locked up so long, I guess they'd got over the mad spell, if there was one.
Yeah.
And
did they look like they'd been well fed? I've seen pictures.
Oh, they didn't look good. Yeah, they were thin.
Not a lot to eat.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Well, you get back here. Did you come straight back to South Dakota when you?
Yeah, we went to Fort Lewis, Washington, and got discharged out there. Or came into San Francisco and took a train up there and.
When you got home, of course, you had the GI Bill, and did you think about college at all? Or?
Yeah, I did. And the next summer, I got married, which is going to be 60 years in a couple of weeks.
And your wife's name is Sylvia?
Yeah.
What was her maiden name?
Folven.
Yeah. How's that spelled?
Folven.
Okay.
She was a Norski. Her dad came from Norway. Her mother was a native born here, but Norwegian. And she wanted me to. She was a teacher at that time. She was teaching in here and taught there several years when they couldn't get teachers. And I remember her telling.
Elementary or?
Yeah, elementary. Jefferson School.
Jefferson's still there.
Yeah. And she, in fact, she had a job in Volga. We could have gone. And she had a good friend that was doing that and had a husband there. And I had every opportunity, but I thought I wanted to farm, and I wished ever since, of course, that I'd done it, but didn't. And she was pretty upset about that, but she got over it, I guess. And
there were probably millions of guys that did go to
they had all kinds of settlements around there where they were living in, tar paper buildings, and it was a great thing. I went to a vets class here, so I got some benefits out of that. Monetary benefits, and we got something out of it. In fact, the fellow that we had for an instructor is just my age, and he lives up south of Webster yet. He's retired. He was a teacher. And,
They probably paid attention to the welfare of the veterans after that war, maybe better than they did of any war we've been in.
They sure did. Yeah. Yeah, it was... and, of course, everybody was involved in the war because of the rationing. You've heard all about that, of course, and many things were rationed, and so you were very conscious of it. And you couldn't get these A stamps, I think 4 gallons of gas a week. And
you didn't go very far on that.
No, you didn't. Of course, we didn't want to go very far either.
Yeah. Tires were...
and tires, they were next to impossible. Yeah.
A lot of patches on
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I had, during the winter, it was a slack time, of course, and a couple winters I did work around here. There was straw bale crews came in to bale straw piles to make boxes out of. It was a war effort move. And we had time to do about what you wanted, and I went down to Iowa, and 2 friends of mine, I had 2 sisters down there. And I can remember coming back with that, the tire trouble we had. I don't know how many flat tires we fixed, and you couldn't buy anything. But we made it, yeah.
The trains were a main means of travel yet.
Yeah, they were, but, we didn't use it much around here.
What were the roads like around here?
Well, they were
pretty much gravel yet?
Yeah.
Gravel?
Yeah, there's very little hard surface road in Day County, county road that is.
Yeah.
And, but it was gravel, but a lot of the side roads were dirt yet then. Yeah.
So you get back to the farm there in almost 1947. And,
Yeah.
Farming was looking up in the late 40s.
Yeah, it was, but it was so different than today. It's just no comparison, really. But it was, but I was all gung ho on it. I was aggressive at it, and
people have talked about how they had been saving up money during the war, and because there wasn't much to spend it on.
No, that's right.
Comes the end of the war, and you almost have to wait in line to get anything that you might want.
Yeah. And my dad and my grandpa were both conservative, so they weren't the first ones to have a tractor. And they were, I can remember as a little kid, our neighbor had a tractor, a farmall. And I can remember that really was fascinating to me, and telling my dad that why he wouldn't have one. He said he couldn't afford to buy the gas for it. I remember that. He said, I wouldn't take one if they gave it to me. And of course, those people had as big a struggle as the guy farming with horses. They maybe did a little more, but not enough to pay the gas bill. And we had a relative that bought one of the first ones around Lily, and I always remember he had it for I don't know how long, but he bought it in Webster, and when he died, the implement dealer there said, I want to go to his funeral. I want to be sure he's really dead. He bought that, never paid a dime on it. And, of course, the machine dealers went broke.
Yeah.
There was one in Lily. There was an international dealer there. And because of those times, the people weren't deadbeats. They just didn't have any money. And bought, I suppose, the first tractor. Well, I remember the first one my dad bought, a case, VAC case, with a 2-row cultivator and a 2-bottom plow, and traded in 1 horse for $700. Well, you know what the sales tax is now. That's one pays sales tax, hardly anything. But it was trying times, but everybody was in the same boat, and there was land here over east. Here was a school section, and every township had those. There was land that laid idle, wasn't farmed at all for several years.
Of course, one of the other things that happened about that time after the war was I think in this area at least, was rural electrification. How did
Yeah,
get
that
started?
was later than that here.
It was.
Yeah, we lived right along the High Line that goes from Lily to Bradley, Northwestern Public Service, and we had lights at our place. But when we moved out here then in 36, well, there was no lights out here, of course, and I remember well the first night we stayed out here after that spring. My grandpa died in February, and we moved that spring, and my dad and I stayed out here, and my grandma, it was an old two-story house. In fact, it still sits in Roslyn. When we built that house in the 60s, why somebody bought it and moved it. But anyway, they never used the upstairs because just grandpa and grandma there, as I remember the kid. But there was an upstairs with 3 bedrooms in it. And I remember going up there the first night I stayed here, and there was a kerosene lamp. And I went up there, and I didn't know how to turn it out. But I soon learned, and I took a hold of the chimney with my hand. Ooh. And that mark is almost still there, too. So I learned fast how to blow a lamp out. But electricity didn't come here then until after the war. Mm-hmm. And we were far removed from Webster, and it's branched out from the county seats, and we didn't get it till we had my folks bought a wind charger then during the war, and so we thought we were fortunate there, the 32 volt. Mm-hmm. And it had electricity, but not much more. We had a kerosene refrigerator, I remember that.
Mm-hmm. Was that fairly common, wind chargers out on farms?
Well, there wasn't a lot of them, but there was some of them. Yeah.
I interviewed a guy who had been a manager, and he talked about having an ongoing struggle with a wind charger guy who went out and tried to convince people that electricity would be dangerous if they put it in, and that they should just stick with the wind chargers.
Yeah, I'm sure there was some of that. Because where we lived next to Lily, we were just on the edge of town, and we had electricity. Well, the High Line went on about down there, and there was the next farm down was a good half mile, but the house wasn't one pole length from the power line. Mm-hmm. And they tried to get electricity, and they wouldn't serve them. They told them that they knew the farmers couldn't pay the bill, so they just wouldn't put it in, and they wanted $1,200 to put it in. Well, there wasn't $1,200 in the whole South Half-a-Day County at that time, So they just were writing it off. And then a few of them along the power line that came from Bristol to Butler to Lily to Bradley did get it, but not very many, and they had to be right next to it or they didn't get it at all. But this fellow was right next to it, and he still didn't get it. And, of course, he never did get it then when REA came. Then they came back. They wanted to pick them all up, Well, there were very few takers at that time because they were so bitter and remembered what had happened. Yeah.
And that would be Lake Region?
Yeah,
When they get started. They get started after the war, or did they'd
started
before that?
Yeah, they'd tried to, but they hadn't done any construction at all, I don't think, till the war was over. They couldn't get material, of course. Yeah. And then it happened right up around Webster first, one project, and then another. And and they didn't, it was the late 40s, almost 50 before we got it. But we maybe waited a year or so because we had the wind charger and it was still working and the batteries were good. But there wasn't any neighbors that had it. Well, the neighbor north of us had a wind charger too. But there was the only ones out in this area. And of course, there was a lot of places out here at that time. When we moved here in 36, we're 4 miles directly north of Bradley as the crow flies, in the middle of the section. And there was on the road a half mile west and south, that was the main Lily Bradley road. There was 12 places along there. Now there isn't any operating farms along there, not one. There's 2 places with somebody living on. And on the east road was the same thing, only that was just a trail at that time. And then when the high water came, that road got to be our main road. We still use it quite a bit because it's of necessity. In the high water here, you came through that last grade. It wasn't much below the water line.
A little bit, a few more inches of rain around here, you're going to be underwater.
That's right. And the road here now, that was under for 10 or 12 years. just been out 2 or 3 years, really. The county road. And,
yeah, it's kind of eaten on both sides, it looks
yeah,
like today.
Yeah, it is.
It's just room enough for a car on there,
yeah.
you know. You gotta watch where you're going so you don't slide off one side or the other.
And on when you get to the county, this is the county line here, and when you get to there, why, of course, it went underwater, but we drove through it for quite a while, but we got to have a path around through our field, the corner of the field, and they would have done something there, but that's when we first put in irrigation, and it would have built a road around there too, but it would have interfered with the pivot circle, and so we never wanted to do it. We just left a trail there that we could use ourselves.
So, had folks around here been Farmers Union here very active in the 30s?
Not so much here. There was west of Lily. There was a lot more of it. There wasn't. I suppose Lily was the center of this, and there was a number of people that weren't involved in farming that lived there at that time, and so there never was an active York Township chapter like out west there. Man, that was a religion. They met regularly, you know.
Yep.
I know every month, if not oftener. And I remember going out there once or twice to a meeting. It was Farmers Union sponsored, but it was a basket social thing, country schoolhouse where they held them.
Yeah.
And up the Butler Way the same way, but there was a lot of it out there. Everybody belonged to it. And over here east farther, there wasn't as much, but there was some of it too. Yeah.
What about cooperatives around here? Of course, we talked about the Rural Electric. Was there a cooperative of any kind in Lily?
No, there never was.
There was a. When did the oil company at Webster get started?
Well, it started in, I'd say in the early 30s. Of course, at that time, Webster was so far off, we hardly knew where it was.
Well, yeah.
We never went to Webster. Everything we wanted in this life, you could get in Lily. I told that when went to Washington many times in the early years of the Rural Electric, and everything you could get in Lily you wanted until I was 21 years old. And that was true about. Freight came in once or twice a day.
Yeah. What was the population of Lily in those days?
I think the high point had got to be 100, 120 maybe.
About the size of what Bradley says down there.
Yeah, not as much as Bradley.
Not as much.
Yeah.
And how many are there now? Is there anybody left there?
There's 8 people live in Lily now. Yeah. No, there's just about nothing. And there's no business, of course, at all anymore.
Yeah.
No kid. There's one family that's got 2 school-age kids, and they've homeschooled them for several years. The oldest one just finished high school this year. So there's no school bus service, and at one time when they were fighting to see who was going to get the territory, there was 3 school buses ran down the main street of Lily. Now there's none. Don't need any, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked about when did you get married now?
June of 47.
June of 47. Yeah. Okay, and you have kids.
Yeah, our son is the farmer here.
Okay, what's his name?
Mike.
Okay.
And he's got a daughter, or we've got a daughter that's in Aberdeen. She's a nurse up there. That's it. Yeah.
And grandchildren?
Yeah, Mike's got, our daughter's got 1 girl, and Mike's got 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl. And the boys, I think some of them will farm here someday. I think they ought to be now, but I'm not in charge anymore. I still got opinions, but I have to keep them to myself a little more than I used to. I was kind of outspoken on things. And
when did you get involved with the Rural Electric up here?
It would have been in, I think it was 66.
Okay.
Yeah. It was 66. And I'd never been to an RA meeting. One of the activist neighbors from west of town came out to see me. I'm sure I wasn't his first choice, but they all turned him down. They didn't want anything to do with it. And I said, yeah, I'd be a candidate, and the annual meeting was in Webster in the schoolhouse, and you've heard of the name of Dury. There's still a bunch of them up there farming. There's several of them. And the old fellow there came out to see me, and I remember where I was. I was planting corn over in the corner over west here. And he came out there to the field, and I said, I didn't think I wanted. Oh, he said, you young fellows are all the same. God damn it, he said, you got to get involved in these things. And he was real forceful, and so I said, well, I'd be a candidate, and I was kind of half scared to go, because I thought, well, I wouldn't have any chance. And the old original ones were on the board, and that was my opponent. He'd been one of the original corporators, but had moved to town. Mm-hmm. Well, he was still on the board, and that didn't sit very good with, like, this Dury fella.
Yeah.
And I won easily, which surprised me, and it shocked him too, I think. And it was probably the start of the old guard being replaced, really. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I never regretted it. It was a great experience. I was on board for 30 years, and that was long enough. My wife wanted me to quit before that, but and I was on the state board for 25 years and the national director for 15 years. Mm-hmm. It was all a great experience. Wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah. Was there when you were first on the board? Was there somebody that was on the board was kind of used as a role model? Since you had not been involved before,
Art Jones. He was Mr. REA to everybody that ever knew of him. He was. I said many times, next to my dad, he was the greatest man in my growing up years. He was quite a fellow. Of course, I never knew him before.
Mm-hmm. But he was from quite a ways north.
He was from Britain, yeah. But he was really a real spokesman for the whole thing. Well, you've heard of him, of course.
He was in the legislature then.
Yeah. He and Herbs from Emory, who was Wes Dulitz's in-laws, were the only two people in the Senate at one time. He talked about that they could meet in the phone booth. And then he was the first president of East River for a number of years and the first president of Basin. And he was just one outstanding fellow. I don't know how to describe him in strong enough terms, that he was such a forceful fella and so knowledgeable about everything and so dedicated to it. And that was just the greatest experience of my years, getting to know him and working with him. And he was the secretary of the board from day one here, I think, from when they organized. And then another Britain fellow, Merle Meckley, was the first chairman. And I'd only been on there a short time, and they were all getting, well, older, you know, and they I had wanted to change, and Merle was gone in the wintertime quite a bit, and so they thought they needed to change to somebody that was here all the time, so I was elected to it, and I was the chairman for 18 years, I think. It got to be, I thought it was long enough, and it was. But some of the old originals, well, there wasn't any of them left here anymore, of course, long gone. But it was a great experience, and being the national director was a great experience. I got to know Bob Berglund firsthand, and in fact, I was on the board when we helped hire him as the general manager, and was going in there regularly for meetings when he was the Secretary of Agriculture, and got to know him through that and through the Rural Electric program, and had went to the White House 2 different times when Mr. Carter was in office. That was quite an experience to be invited there and see the thing on the inside.
What kind of issues did you have? Were you dealing with in the rural electrics in the mid '60s?
Well, there was territory problems.
Yeah.
I remember well when the early years, there wasn't any defined territory, and then they drew the lines. There was some state legislation, and Art, of course, was on top of that from our side and the legislative side both. And I remember drawing a line around Webster, deciding where it had a zigzag, and then what we did, the manager and I, and met with a fellow that was the vice president of public service, who'd been a Webster native, but didn't think like we did, and we drew the lines. That was the biggest thing that happened when that was done, and they still stand today pretty much. There's a little hassle once in a while. Watertown had one here a couple of years ago and over territory, but
that kind of thing was it fairly routine to fight over territory before that legislation was passed?
It sure
particularly,
was.
I suppose around the bigger cities.
Yeah, it wasn't much here. There was a little around Webster, but there wasn't. Where towns were expanding, it was a big issue. It was like Watertown in particular. You know, it went from 8,000 or 9,000 people to 22,000 or 3,000 people. There was push out all the time. And
what was the situation like around Lake Compesca? Was that an issue there too?
Oh yeah, it was.
Is that within the city limits of Watertown?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But was it originally?
It wasn't originally, but they acquired it in time. And I'm not sure. And then they're municipal, of course, too. So that was a little bit different than having the power company as the supplier.
Yeah.
Well, quite different, really.
Yeah. Did it belong to
Missouri Valley Electric, I think. Missouri Valley, I've forgotten the name of some of those organizations now, was the entity that they got their power from. Yeah. But it was, at the high time, they got to be about 60% lake power, water power, and 40% from the basin, through East River, of course, and then basin. And they've constantly declined. They had better horse traders than we did because they grew all the time, and we couldn't ever get any more power. The original allocation we thought too small out here, and I suppose it was natural for anybody that lived out in the rural area to think that there was going to be much growth, and there wasn't, but you soon got, so we maximized all the power you could get.
Yeah.
That was cheap power.
Yeah. Well, people probably had a hard time anticipating what kind of electrical devices they might be invented in the future that they want.
You bet. Yeah, that's exactly right. There was your imagination couldn't run wild enough to think of what was going to come.
No, you could look around your house and see all the various things that at the time electricity arrived had not even been invented.
Right. No, when we moved out here, we didn't have electricity, and we'd had it in town, and we didn't have many things on the edge of town, but we had a Maytag washing machine, an electric one, And when we came out here, and after my grandpa died, and we were here, and my mother was gone, so my dad was alone here, and he wanted her to use it, and she wouldn't use it. And I remember they used to have the old washing machine, the hand crank thing, down in a little building we called a milk house where we separated milk. And I went this path one day and went by there, and here was the ringer busted in two, and Dad had taken it up and chopped it in two, so she had to quit using that. Well, my sisters, of course, knew how to run the washing machine, and we had a closer place to the house, and that's what we used, but Grandma never touched that. And I remember that yet so well. Wondered, well, what happened to that ringer? He took it off and chopped it in two. She wouldn't have nothing to do with that. Yeah.
Of course, you were also involved in some issues at the federal level. There have been multiple efforts to kill off the rural electrics. You were on the board.
Yeah, that was an ongoing thing. That was the big charge of NRECA, National Rural Electric, was to protect the rural areas from power grabs, territory over. And that was we had regular board meetings. There was one of us from each state. And that was an interesting experience, the years I spent at that. And everybody all over the country had troubles, the territory. That was a big fuss all the time. And that was the big issue, was staying in enough clout to be able to. But in those years, starting from the Franklin Roosevelt time on up till well, I suppose into the 80s or when Carter got turned out, why the rural area was pretty much the home territory of the rural electrics, and there wasn't any fuss about it. But then Congress turned against the rural areas and a lot of it, and that caused more hassle and trying to protect territory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any questions for the 2% loans, for example, and preference clause
right.
for hydropower?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And of course that was so necessary and so good for the area, but we didn't understand it very well back then, or how essential it was, the 2% loan, because they were offered to the private companies and they wouldn't take it. Mm-hmm. They couldn't serve the areas. They said, well, those farmers can't pay those bills, and so they weren't interested at all.
I understand they also, as they started out there, they had rules on how many people you had to have per mile to be able to get a loan, and a lot of places in South Dakota didn't have that.
No, we didn't. Most of the state was that way. And here today we're only, I think, about 1.5. Yeah. But of course, everybody uses so much more. We irrigate some, so we've got more use, but our farm alone uses more power than all the farms that have disappeared around here, easy more. Yeah. And that's true all over. Every place is the same. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So even though the population has gone down in South Dakota rural areas, the need for electric power has gone up.
The usage has gone up all the time, yeah.
How about any other interesting people you had a chance to work with over the years? You talked about Art Jones.
Well, he was a truly great one, and he was a great fellow, no doubt about it. And we got to know the administrators. That was a big choice thing at that time, that whoever was in political power appointed the administrator, and we had several of those that were good people. Dave Hamill was one that was there a long time, and he was one of the few that served both parties, I think. He was able to hold his own to not get put out with the change of power. And then, of course, I remember well the original one in South Dakota was Al Hoffey. You've heard of him, of course, from Leola. In fact, that's who I replaced. He died, and I got appointed to the national board then. And he was a real good spokesman for the overall program.
His son Paul has written a book.
Yeah.
You read that?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I met both of his boys several different times at affairs, and they had receptions for Al different times at national conventions for his past effort and things like that. Yeah.
What about relations with East River? Did you work with those folks?
Well, it was always good here because Art was one of the founders of it, Yeah. So we had nothing but good relations. Some of them were more rocky, but we weren't ever because of Art, and he was on top of it, and you might say created it.
Sure.
And pretty much did, I think. And then the know-how he gained there helped create Basin. He and what was that first manager? I can picture him, but I can't remember his name.
Oh yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter. But
you mentioned there was some controversy. I just recently interviewed a guy who, Dennis Hagney, who retired over.
Yeah.
He was talking about there was a lot of controversy over there by the time he got hired.
Yeah, there really was. I remember that well. Yeah, they had Aberdeen was. This Al Haugen was the longtime manager there, and he was an independent son of a gun. Nobody could tell him anything, and they had many hassles over that. They, remember the first time they had a regional meeting. Every 3 years, each state gets one, and the first one we ever had in Aberdeen, and that was the smallest town they'd ever been to, and I was just become the national director at that time and that was kind of controversial. Anything Al wanted, everybody else was against, it seemed like, and he was a different kind of a fellow. You didn't realize he could be so abrasive till you got to know him better, because he seemed decent to meet him, but he kept things stirred up there for years and did several things, instituted a thing of term limitations. And some of the first people that pushed for that was real controversy to get that. And when their time was up, I remember a couple of them, Clarence Erickson and Gene Castles, they were both term limited out, and they didn't like it then when it affected them, you know. I saw this Gene in church in Aberdeen here just a little while ago. He's almost my age.
Yeah.
And he lives in Aberdeen now. He's been divorced and been through some hard times, but he was a strong independent and a strong GOP man, and that entered into it. The politics did too.
Partisan politics.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, Art was Mr. Democrat for years in South Dakota, so there was no question what side he was on all those issues.
And they of course over there they also had some battles over the Oahe.
Oh yeah.
How was the Oahe project viewed over here in Dayton?
Well, we thought it was going to be a big boon to touch the western edge up west of Andover, I think, and but there wasn't much activity here. All we did is follow the papers on the fussing there was that went on there, and George Schuler was a name up there from Claremont that was one of the leaders in the anti-Oahe thing, and his wife happened to be from Lilly. So we got to know him over the years, and but we never were directly involved because we weren't in the Oahe project really. But it was to the west. The farther west you got, the more interest there was because they got closer to the project. And we thought it had happened, and everybody thought it had happened, you know. When
didn't that kind of ultimately become another issue dealt with at the federal level about, well, who's going to pay for these hydroelectric projects if the irrigation doesn't happen?
Yeah, right, yeah. And how they'd make it pay its way, and they were sure it wouldn't, of course. And the Oahe people they had to be a strong-willed bunch. This Piper, you've heard of him, of course, and he had to be real influential and prevailed because it looked like it was a done deal. And then here the thing died. We couldn't believe it hardly. Nowhere we weren't close to it, so we really understood it as well as those people out there did. Remember this Schuler? He's got had quite a bit of real estate up in the Claremont area, and he was really against it because he was going to have to give up some of his land, and then out in farther south, where they were going to cross people's land and not let them have water from it. That really struck anybody wrong. You know, how can you live with that? To think it's going to cross your land, but you can't have any of it. Of course, it might not have been irrigable land either. And so that was beside the point. If you didn't understand that, why, you just thought, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like a lot of projects, highways and railroads and whatever, that they become more difficult all the time
They
to
sure
accomplish
do.
because people really get possessive about their
Yeah.
property and not wanting it to have
I was down to the VA yesterday when it came back by Madison and attended the annual meeting of the Wentworth ethanol plant, and met several people there that I used to know. One of the guys that was one of the managers of East River way back, Don Stryker, just a short time. I think he still is there, but not as the manager. Of course, Jeff's the manager. And we talked about that then, how that was so difficult now to get footings to get a site for an ethanol plant. And nobody wants to, we want it, but not next to me. And that's issue with so many things now. So it gives them a hard time to how to fund or how to build many different new projects. You got to wonder about this one they talk about down at is it Elk Point? as big as that is, the controversy there must be coming over. You haven't heard what it's going to be yet.
Yeah. Yep. That's for sure.
What is it going to be? Do you know?
I know they keep calling it the gorilla.
Yeah, but they won't say what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And that's kind of got some people,
Mystery.
yeah, riled up down that way.
I guess do you think South Dakota in the rural areas would have ever gotten electricity if there had not been a rural electric program?
Well, I suppose it would have come about some way, but it's hard to see how.
Yeah. Particularly out on the far end
Yeah,
of the sparsely populated areas.
Yeah, right. We were 20 miles from Webster and that far from Clark, a little more than that. Mm-hmm. And right kind of between, we had no spokesman that was active involved in trying to do anything about it, so we'd have been awful late getting it if it hadn't been for the rural electric program, I'm sure, because their motto was, hey, we're going to serve everybody, and which was a great thing that they did. Yeah.
And certainly changed life out on the farm.
Did it ever? Yeah. Yeah, to think that you couldn't have water before or plumbing, and just accepted that. But that had to be a dramatic change.
Yeah, coming from that kind of conditions to where rural people expect to have at least an equal standard of living with people in town.
Right.
And they didn't used to think that way.
No, they were accepting a lot less. Yeah. And they just thought, well, that's the way it has to be if you're going to be out here, I guess. And my grandpa and grandma, when he homesteaded here, they were married shortly after that, and they came up here from Canby, is where she came from, to Watertown, and he worked for the Compesca House. And when they first came up here, in the 50-some years my grandma lived here, I don't think she went to Webster. I know she didn't go 10 times in those 50 years. And now here there's several vehicles a day go to Webster from this same spot, Mm-hmm. What a change. Yeah.
Challenges facing cooperatives today have changed from what they were. What seems like the biggest change to you? I know there's a question of mergers that goes on. I know we've had some of the, down around Huron, we've had some mergers.
Yeah, that's one of the big things. And we're all kind of reluctant to give up the reins of power to you. Want to keep in charge if you can. And the gas go-off, same thing. They've consolidated by far, Every little town used to have a community oil or some type of thing, and they're all disappearing. And the bigness has entered into it. You've got enough clout to think you can bargain better by yourself, and you don't need your collective neighborhood to do it. And that's really changed when there's a few big operators control everything, And that's still growing. The bigger the operator, the more clout he's got, and the more he's going to try to use. Some of them, not everybody, but a good share of them, they're going to use that in driving the price down of whatever the product is that they need to buy or sell.
And it makes it hard for the smaller co-ops.
Oh, yeah, they do. Yeah, they really do. There's constant mergers. Years back, you didn't realize the change that was evolving right then. But now when you look back, you think, my gosh. And the number of farms that disappeared. There's not need for the towns there was.
Yep.
Yeah.
How important do you think cooperative education is? Do you think that's still something that's...
Well, I think it's helpful, but the young people more and more are coming from farms that, if it's a bigger farm, they're not so in tune to it, and it doesn't mean as much to them. And the effort Farmers Union has always made to help beginning farmers, I'm not against that. I'm all for it. But it's so futile, there isn't much chance of much of it happening. That's what I see. Unless you can, your family is big enough to be able to expand, and we're kind of in that stage right here now. At one time, I was one of the bigger farmers around, and now our son doesn't want that. He wants to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
We're handling as many acres or more, but he's hesitant to get his boys involved, and they kind of, I think one of them eventually will, because he's past 50, so he isn't going to be around forever.
Mm-hmm.
But that attitude has changed. If it's a smaller farm, it's just gradually going to get smaller.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think, and of course your experience is primarily with the rural electrics, do you think cooperatives work together enough?
Well, they're
is there
all
a good enough working relationship between
yeah, it no doubt could be better. Yeah, I'm sure of that.
Mm-hmm. A couple of other issues that of course cooperatives have been involved in. One of them I was visiting yesterday with Franklin Olson about was rural water. Do you have rural water here?
No, we don't.
You don't.
We've got it on both sides. We could get it, but we're in a narrow north-south band that's shallow water, and we can get water at.
Mm-hmm.
It just the irrigation wells we got here are 30 feet deep, and they stay. And so we never did see the need for it. We thought about it, and there wasn't very many people close by from Lilly when it came there. That south of it and east of it, there was nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were about the first ones that would have been a prospective customer. And Clark, the same thing. There's not many people left in here. There's so much wasteland in here that there's not many substantial farms.
Yep.
That's what it amounts to.
Yep. What about telecommunications up here? Your telephone service and so on. Is that a co-op or are you?
That's co-op. We're from James Valley, out of Groton. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And their service is good.
Mm-hmm. How about television? Do you?
Yeah, we've got
cable from
there? Little dish or whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. That's available, but that's getting so darn high priced.
Mm-hmm.
Really bugs me.
Yep.
We're in two places, so we've got two television bills, both here in Webster, and you got to have one of the programs to have any access.
You don't have much television if you're trying to get it off the air
No,
anymore.
3 stations, all there is here, you know,
Yep.
and you can't hardly live with that.
Yep.
But gosh, we got the little dish here, and I don't remember what it started at, but the last bill we got, or a month or so ago, they raised it to $55 a month. And we're not here. We're here, but we're not in Webster then, so we're paying it there. And I cut down. I thought I'm going to take the next, because I had the best package, and 3/4 of it, there's nothing to watch. It's crap.
Yep.
If you could pick and choose, that's where if we had clout enough, we ought to be able to demand that Congress make it so you can pick and choose. Mm-hmm. That really bugs me. Mm-hmm. I've got into it a little bit, but it exercise in futility, it seems like.
Yeah.
So I've kind of quit fighting about it.
Yeah. There are certainly channels out there that you'd never use.
Never.
Other than to go by them.
Yeah. You don't even know they're there. And now I only use 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
But this last raise, when they went to $55, I called. I said, I'm going to take the next lower package. And the one, the MSNBC, is one that I like to watch. And that was the one that disappeared.
Is that right?
And that cost $20 a month to lose that, So I never put it back on. We've got it in town. We can get it there, but we're not there when you want to be. No.
And then ethanol, of course, has been. You mentioned attending the Wentworth meeting.
Yeah.
You're a member of one or more.
Oh, several of them. That and Watertown, Millbank, and we're in the process. Granite Falls. We're just selling our shares there for over 4 times what we paid for it.
Yeah.
I listed them for sale with the broker that's handling them, and I did it first when Watertown first started with it, and I had them way too high, but it didn't hurt anything, didn't cost anything, and now this time I lowered it to something over $4, and they cost $1 or $1,000. And the guy called one day and said, would I still like to sell them? And I said, well, yes, they would. Well, they had a potential buyer. I put 25,000 in it, and I'm going to get over 100,000 back.
Whoa.
So that ain't too hard to take.
No.
And I thought it's now they're in the court with Watertown over who's going to manage it. You've maybe seen that in the paper where Watertown is suing them. So I guess I'm glad we're through with that one.
Yeah.
But we're when I did it, because I go to meetings, we got in the Wentworth run right away when it first started, and Mike thought crazy, but now I've said a couple times, well, we could make some money on some of these, Oh, we don't want to sell them now. you didn't think much of it when you first bought them.
Yeah.
But they're returning. You know how they're returning. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a positive thing for agriculture, certainly.
Sure has.
How do you see the future? You're selling a few of them, but you're still a member of several.
Yeah, and we're gonna stay there too, because they're a great thing. There's a lot of change going to come in it. We know that, and how it'll all turn out, I don't know. But it's going to be positive because we know we're going to run out. There's a definite amount of how much petroleum's in the ground, so we're going to run out sometime. We need something, and ethanol is going to fill a bill, and there's no doubt about it. It's worthwhile, and it's efficient in its use. You hear people say every once in a while, "Oh, it takes more than it makes," but that's not true. I've been attended meetings and studies on that for 25 years since my association with the rural electric thing. And that's what I'm hesitant right now on this corn stalks, wood chips. I'm not so sure that's got much future. It's a long ways off before they ever develop anything. There was a lot of work did on that back in Indiana and Illinois and Ohio 20 years ago, at least that. And they had a lot of these that had burned big bales. Well, how are you going to get any capacity to, how far do you have to gather bales for? How far can you haul them? So they've got a lot of problems ahead there. It isn't a cure-all. Just because the president mentioned the thing, that doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight.
And there are areas of South Dakota where they grow grass but some years they don't grow any grass.
Yeah, that's right. And the switchgrass thing, we've got some switchgrass in CRP, and it isn't this high. And it never has been. And I've seen commercials on this where it'll 6 feet tall, don't need any fertilization, don't need very much moisture. Well, you're not going to get much of a plant if you don't have both those elements. No, I think that's, maybe there's a future in it, but I think it's farther away than we think. And I know corn can't furnish at all to replace all our foreign oil by. That's only a small part of it, but they are going to come up with some new developments, and especially if we increase our mileage on our vehicles. And we know that potential is there, but big companies don't want to do it. They make big money on big vehicles.
And of course, another possibility is the blender pump, and I know there's one of those in Webster.
It's all we use, the 30%. And that needs to happen all over.
Yeah, and your vehicle is
it works good.
Yeah.
I went to Sioux Falls.
All the stories about it not working.
No, that's baloney. You know Ori Swayze, of course, and he's a expert if there ever was one, there ever is one.
I've already interviewed him.
Oh, have you? Yeah. He's just fantastic, and his knowledge on that thing is so great that he's... No, it's a real potential. We yesterday went to Sioux Falls. We just traded car. I had an E85, and I didn't like it. It was a Chevy, and it wasn't new, but didn't have many miles on when I bought it, and I couldn't get any mileage out of it. Plus, it's a full-size car, and it was cramped quarters for me.
Yeah.
And so I drove it 6-8 months and traded it off, and. On a full-sized Ford or Mercury.
And you can run that 30% through it.
Yeah, it's all I ever use.
Probably there's a much greater opportunity to expand the use of ethanol that way than there is through E85.
I asked a guy down there yesterday. They had a couple national speakers there at their convention, and he said that's where we're really lacking. We need more of that out there, these blender pumps, but there's, how many there is in the state. And
there's been a couple co-ops that put them in.
Yeah, right.
Britain and Watertown.
Yeah. No, and the Watertown fellow says how it's increased their gallonage, by. No, I think it worked good. I checked yesterday. I've got a Lincoln Marquis. It's a year old. Just got it. Made 26.5 miles going to Sioux Falls and back. Well, that ain't not 30 or 35, but it's respectable anyway.
Yeah.
And the Chevy, the E85, which I bought just for that, wouldn't make that.
Yeah.
And I was disappointed in that when I bought it used, kind of spur of the moment, because I wanted an E85.
Yeah.
And I found out after I bought it, the instruction book was in the cubbyhole of when it was new, because it didn't have so many miles on it when I bought it. It said in there that from the factory, when it gets to be used at 30 degrees, you shouldn't burn over 30 or 70% of that. It should be gas, Well, I went back to the dealer after I read it. Well, the man that sold it to me didn't know that. I said, you ought to be sued for that, selling this and not knowing any more than that about it. I didn't know it, I grant you, but you're the dealer. And he wasn't a Chevy dealer, so he was looking at it just something to sell,
Mm-hmm.
No, I think there's a big potential for more if we get any number of those blender pumps. Of course, that takes a while to educate people. We got people in town that I see regularly. Oh, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that. It'll hurt their car. The only trouble we had when we first started mixing it ourselves, you'd get too strong a mixture, and that check engine light would come on. Well, we learned how to cure that by disconnecting the battery for 1 second, and that'll go out. But now with the blend, it never comes on anymore. So that's a plus, as far as I'm concerned, and it works fine.
Yep.
No problem at all.
Activity in farm organization. You've been involved in Farmers Union for quite a while.
Yeah, I have. But all the while I was in Rural Electric, I wasn't very much because I was so involved there on the local, state, and national level, all three.
You did attend National Farmers Union conventions.
Yeah, I have several times.
Yeah, when you were still on the Rural Electric Board, did you?
Maybe just at the very end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, they always had a national convention. When I was a national director, there were so many extra meetings all over the country to go to that I just never did very much then.
Okay. So when did you retire from the board here?
It's about 10 years ago now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. About 1996, 97, somewhere along there?
Yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah, I think it is about 10 years ago. Yeah. Yeah.
You've been do you keep track of what?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they got their annual meeting coming up tomorrow night here, Lake Region, yeah. I never miss them because it's always of interest. And I know Kermit you know Kermit Pearson. And in fact, I got him to run for the board. He was on our local board, and I'd been there a long time, and I just was not totally happy with the representation we had on the East River. And so I went out where he had the pasture party that time, and I got him out there making hay and said, I'm going to nominate you, and I want you to be our next representative. And he was reluctant because it was kind of a split between the board, and I didn't like to either because it was a board, and I knew them all, but he agreed to it, and now he's director or vice president, I think, up there, or secretary, I forget what it is. And he's a good fella. Gee, he's real capable. Our meetings are well run, well put together, and that's partly him, not all of it. The manager's a big part of it, but Kermit's a big part of it too.
Having good directors on any co-op is an important thing.
Yeah, it sure is. Not just a rubber stamp, but have some input. And one person can't know it all. They need input. And I think that's so important. Yeah.
Would you say that maybe some of the co-ops have maybe gotten in a little bit of trouble because maybe the boards didn't pay close enough attention to what the manager was doing?
I think there's no question about that, yeah. I don't know if there were really bad results from it, but management is important. I know that because they're the day-to-day people, but you've got to have some outside insight into that too. Kind of an interesting thing down there yesterday at Wentworth. they're looking at a merger now. That they've got a proposal from an outfit in Iowa, and I think it's I've already forgotten the name of it, Countryside or something like that. Money man in Iowa who we know of because he came from Mason City. And my nephew happens to be the mayor of Mason City. And so in fact, he bought this guy's business. Papa John, his name is. And the guy's getting old now. But he's got, he said 60 different ideas formed into value-added co-ops throughout the state of Iowa. And here's his new one to get co-ops like Wentworth. They're all alone. They disassociated from brewing industry in the last year or two. And to get enough of them to be a force in the overall picture. I think it'd be a good thing.
Yeah, there are dangers out here for the there was a big story in the Argus here just 3 weeks ago about the farmers losing control of the ethanol plants and the big business that was taken over. I
think it was in that same issue. It said in the state of Iowa, 57% of them was out of the hands of locals. I asked that question down there yesterday. I said, is that true? Is there concern about it? Well, no, they said there wasn't, of course. And I trust them, but I know Ron Alverson, he's a shirt tail relative of ours that was the first president at Wentworth. And so I've talked to him about it different times, and if there's going to be a merger, if they're going to sell out or what, and they're not going to sell out, but they want to keep control, but they're willing to join a bigger group that are small independents like them, because they need some help that you can only get through contacts with other people that are more knowledgeable in that area.
There's it seems to me like there was some talk about the plants getting together and they may be branding their ethanol.
Yeah, that's what will be one of the results of it. And then I think the Watertown man is a good fella, but he got real aggressive in that, and now here it's backfiring on him. See, they started a suit against Granite Falls for $5 million, and Redfield is going to peel off from them. And I think they need each other, and maybe he was too aggressive, and maybe the fee was too great for him. I can see local boards thinking, well, hey, we're giving them over $1 million a year. We don't need to do that. But then up here at Millbank, or Big Stone City, I know those fellas, and they've got a good, knowledgeable board, and they're saying, hey, we're going to stay with Broynes, and got a new contract. It's the very same year that Wentworth left them. And I don't know, Broynes, I wouldn't say they're getting too big for their britches, but you got to wonder.
Yeah, they changed their name to Poet.
Poet, which I think is goofy, but then
I thought maybe they were going to be making fuel out of English majors.
maybe that's it. And they've done a lot. I think the Broyne place is great, but they're not the ultimate. There's other people that got knowledge in this industry too.
Sure.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give someone today that wanted to that was thinking about maybe running for a rural electric board or something?
Oh, I think it'd be a real challenge. They ought to do it. And the trouble is now they've got trouble getting candidates that'll run. And it does take time, but it's a rewarding experience. There's no question about that. And it's giving you contacts. I know I would never, had it not been for contacts that I made over the years, got involved in the ethanol thing right away. And Wentworth was the first one, and it's got to be one of the best ones because, of course, it's older. That's part of it. But because you've been exposed to it, and I was way back when they were trying some of these goofy things in Illinois and Iowa. We went to several of them where they built these bale burners out in the country, and trying it out, and none of them worked out. And now we're talking the same thing again, only they're going to have to come up with some new knowledge somewhere. If they can liquefy it quick and easy, and you see some quick fixes in the paper every day, that something I just the other day, it was going to be 3 or 4 times more efficient than they thought. The new type of ethanol out of things like that.
Sometimes it seems like you can tell that you're making some impact by the number of people that start attacking you.
Yeah,
Maybe have
yeah,
an
that's
interest
true. That's right.
In some other form of energy.
And you know that Big Oil has got money to burn when it comes to pushing their issue and trying to walk over you. And I'm sure that's what a lot of the thinking there is, that we'll get to buy these for 10 cents on a dollar one of these times. And maybe they will, some of them, I don't know.
Yeah.
We've got relatives down in Iowa, and the fellow that we see the most is in the crop insurance business in a little town. But it's good rural area where it's solid ag around there. And so he's the local contact for the farmers around, really. And that's all his customers are farm people with crop insurance. And he's kind of worried that there's one of these big egg factories right near them that's got, I don't know how many, is it in the millions now, I think, and about how they're losing the local touch in this egg thing. It's got so several individuals got a big share of it now. And it's not the co-op that they thought they were starting with.
Yeah.
They've had some problems there already. I talk to them every once in a while, and there's got to be input on the local level from somebody other than management that's just looking out for the good of the area.
Yeah. Just got a couple or three questions left here. Looking back over the years, have you had any disappointments in working with co-ops in the cooperative arena? Anything like that? It didn't work out?
I don't really think so that I can think of offhand.
I guess my alternative question is, what during the time you were involved, what are you most proud of that you were involved with?
Well, in my years, especially on the national level, getting Bob Berglund to head our thing for one time, and I had something to do with that, and that's my claim to fame. I've said several times. He's a great fellow, I think. We got to know him pretty well, and I guess that's the one individual thing that I still always recall and think of.
Are you? Would you describe yourself as an optimist or a pessimist?
Well, my wife says I'm pessimistic, but I tell her that a lot of times there isn't very much difference between them.
I think I interviewed one person who described themselves as a realist.
Yeah, well, that's what I would agree to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you'd like to mention that I didn't ask you about? I never quite know what I'm going to get when I ask that question.
No, I don't know. I can't think of anything. I think the Farmers Union has been a good force within the state, but there again, look at the membership. How we're disappearing. Too many of the big operations don't think that some of this co-op stuff is worthwhile. They can go it alone. Of course, I remember my wife was a teacher. We always talked about these kind of things, and I've been a little bit of an activist. And when the teachers first got unionized, she'd tell about the young teachers had come. Well, they didn't need to join the union. They could do their own bargaining. Well, any of us that think we can go it alone, we gotta wake up, because there's just strength in numbers. There's no question about that. And the sooner we realize that, the better. But it's awful easy to become independent, and as you get bigger, maybe we're farm-wise, we're not at that point. My son is not independent thinking, but he just wants to go it alone. He don't want to get involved in anything to speak of, and I guess he's got to decide that. I can't decide for him. And he belongs to our organization, but of course all young people are so darn busy making a living. How much time do they have to devote to it?
Yeah.
That's all I've got to do now is go to meetings. That's about all I do. Yeah, but I enjoy that. ASC, I've gotten so I'm almost losing that because it's got so complex. But otherwise, I enjoy this ethanol thing because I go to all of them. We're in the Volga plant and the Brewster one, but they're a different animal than corn plants.
Oh yeah.
They're not returning anything. And right now there's one talking in Webster, soybean processing. They've been talking it for 6 months at least. And in fact, tonight, I believe is the night that the dozen or 2 dozen fellows they got that put in a little money, not a lot, I'd say 5,000 at the most, are going to vote on whether to keep proceeding or to. I've told them unofficially and tried not to be abrasive that we've put our money where our mouth is in all of a couple of soybean plants and 5 or 6 of the soybean or the corn plant, and they're not the same animal. And ADM and Cargill control, they're the big dogs in the world in soybeans. And they're trying to tell you they're going to build something up here that's got a secret thing that nobody knows about. They got exclusive rights on. I said, I just can't believe it. And so I'm not on good terms with a number of the locals because I haven't been outspoken, but when we've talked about it, I've told about our experience and what better can you relate to.
Yeah.
This one's making money, the other one's isn't.
Even for the large regional grain marketing co-ops,
Yeah.
they've had difficulty trying to get into the export area
Yeah.
just because of the power of those
Giants,
people that are already
yeah.
dominating.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's sure true.
Okay. Anything else?
No, not that I can think of.
Okay. We've been visiting with Joe Mathews. Thank you for, or should I say Lloyd Mathews?
No, it's Joe.
Okay. We're visiting with Joe Mathews. Thank you for participating in the Cooperative Legacy Project.
When you went to